Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. My name's Doug Irwin. I'm a professor in the Economics Department and co-director of the Political Economy Project. And on behalf of the Rockefeller Center and the PEP, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's event. So I'm teaching a class this quarter called The Future of Capitalism, Government 28, along with 68, along with Professor Charlie Whelan and Professor Russ Muirhead. And we took our students last night here in Rockefeller to see a movie streaming on Netflix, which I highly recommend, called The Pursuit. And our speaker today is the star and the organizer of this documentary, which I highly recommend that you watch on Netflix. It's very interesting, inspiring, thought-provoking, everything you want from a good documentary. So in our class and in the movie, there are a number of economic themes, a number of public policy themes. Poverty, and how do we reduce it? Joblessness, and how do we deal with it? Our current condition, both political and economic. But our speaker today, and in this documentary, goes much deeper than that. It's not just about those themes, it's about how do we achieve our aspirations? How do we build a society that enables the flourishing of the human being? I can think of no one who has thought more deeply about this topic and who has spoken more eloquently than Arthur Brooks, who we are very fortunate to have here today with us. He is currently professor of public leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and the Arthur C. Patterson Faculty Fellow at the Harvard Business School. Before joining the Harvard faculty, he served for 10 years as president of the American Enterprise Institute, a center-right public policy think tank in Washington, D.C. He is the author of 11 books, most recently the national bestsellers Love Your Enemies, published in 2019, The Conservative Heart, published in 2015, and The Road to Freedom, published in 2012. He's a columnist for The Washington Post and is the host of The Arthur Brooks Show, a podcast, and of course, the subject of the documentary, The Pursuit, just released a few weeks ago. Before all that, he served as a professor of business and government at Syracuse University, where he taught economics and social entrepreneurship. And before that, he was an accomplished French horn player. So please join me in welcoming Arthur Brooks.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks to all of you. What a delight it is to be back here at Dartmouth. Last time I was here, it was 0 degrees and snowing hard. And that made for hard times for the audience. So I get to see some of you perhaps that were intending to come see me last January. If not, it's great to see you under all circumstances. I loved guest lecturing in the class on capitalism today. How many of you were in that class on capitalism? All right, 2/3 of you. I won't tell the same jokes. I hope. I want to talk about the subject that's on a lot of people's lips, which is whether capitalism is good. But I want to talk about it in a different way than probably any of you have thought about it. Now, capitalism today is really wrapped up in the political debates of our time. It's, as a matter of fact, most people don't understand capitalism removed from Democrat-Republican debates today. When I was in Washington until recently running the American Enterprise Institute, there's a story that goes around, it's a joke that's kind of popular in Washington about these two Republican senators that are walking down the street after taking some votes, and they're just talking, shooting the breeze, and they walk in front of the Democratic National Committee. For those guys, the heart of darkness. And they look at the window, and there's a big sign in the window, and the sign says, "Become a Democrat today, earn $1,000. And they look at each other like, do you think they're serious about that? He says, I don't know. He says, I tell you what, go in and pretend you want to become a Democrat. I'll wait here, let's see what happens. And his buddy's like, yeah, okay, you know what? I'm gonna do it. So he's waiting outside, and his friend goes in and doesn't come out. 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes pass. He goes and sits on a park bench, and an hour and a half later, his friend finally comes out. So he comes running up to him, he says, so what happened? He says, I joined. He says, what are you talking about? He says, yeah, I'm a Democrat now. They were very convincing. Economic policy, social policy, foreign policy, the whole deal. I'm a Democrat, left-wing Democrat. And his friend is like, jaws on the floor. And he says, did they give you the $1,000? And his friend says, is that all you people think about? Well, my friends, I want to make the case today that capitalism shouldn't be about politics. And if I do my job, I'm going to take it beyond politics in your mind. I'm going to sort out what I think is the biggest problem that we have in our thinking about politics, and I'm going to give you a couple of ideas that are going to help you to be happier. Okay? It's a big task, but let's see. Now, when I hear a lot of complaints about the free enterprise system in America today, the biggest one that I hear is basically that sort of a truism, something that we all know. Capitalism is great for rich people. The problem is it's bad for poor people. That's what I hear constantly. Good for rich people, bad for poor people. Here's the case I'm going to make. Capitalism is actually great for poor people and dangerous for all the rest of us. So what do we need to do? I'm going to tell you what I think we need to do. I'm going to tell you what I'm doing so that it's not dangerous for me, and I'm going to recommend it so it's not dangerous for you. So we can get the best out of the system without getting the worst from the system. That's the job. Okay, so let's start with claim number 2, capitalism is bad for poor people. Now, I always thought that. I thought that like a lot of people do. And part of the reason is because I don't have any background in economics, or at least I didn't until relatively recently. Doug, in his really gracious introduction, pointed out that I was a French horn player. That's actually my first career. When I was 19, I dropped out of college, kicked out, splitting hairs. And I went on the road doing what I always wanted to do, which is to be a professional French horn player. That's what I dreamed of doing since I was 9 years old. I wanted to be the greatest French horn player in the world. This is such a great country, right? It's like a kid can have that dream. It's weird. But I did, and I made my living, and it was phenomenal. I have to tell you, I played music that I loved night after night. But one of the ancillary benefits was a lot of travel. And as I traveled around the United States and around the world, I saw things that opened my eyes to poverty that I had never seen before. Now, at the time, and this is one of the things I was explaining in my remarks to the class today, this is in the 1980s, for example. Americans, and before this, by the way, since the 1970s, Americans have become more and more conscious to the grinding poverty and it's the real deprivation around the world in ways that past generations just simply hadn't seen it. You know, when I was a kid, I remember the first time that I saw real poverty with my own eyes. And for a lot of people in the audience that are my age, you had the same experience. It was a picture in the National Geographic magazine. In the early 1970s, there was a famine in East Africa, in Ethiopia. And people were, by the hundreds, were dying of starvation every day. And the National Geographic had an endeavor to try to expose this to the world so that people could actually see that in our world where we're so rich, there were people who were dying of starvation. So you'd see pictures month after month. You remember this? Of a kid with flies on his face and a distended belly, and the mission or the objective was clear, to tell us we're not doing enough and we don't know what to do. It was a real feeling of desperation when you saw that picture. And it also kind of set in our minds, everybody my age, that Africa is a continent that's largely poor and there's nothing we can do about it. It's sort of lost. A lot of people my age have kind of that intuition all the time. Now, there's lots and lots and lots of new data to say that's wrong, thank God. But that's kind of how a lot of people grew up. It also had this idea that's set in our minds that there's some people who are rich and some people who are poor, and there's a ton of land between us, and we don't know how to get from here to there. Okay, so I grew up. I was, as a musician, traveling around, seeing places like India that seemed really hopeless as well. And sometimes I would wonder, what happened to that kid in the picture? Not that kid specifically. What happened to the poorest people in the world as I grew up? I grew up under working class conditions, but he didn't. He met a bad end, and the world must have been getting worse from there. Most Americans think that the world has gotten worse in terms of poverty and in terms of deprivation. 66% of Americans think the world has gotten poorer since 1970. That the poorest of the world have gotten poorer since 1970. That's completely wrong. In my late 20s, I went back to college. I went back to college by correspondence. I got my degree by distance learning a month before my 30th birthday. And the great thing about that was about not actually having any classrooms and not having any professors is I didn't have any preconceived notions of anything at all. The world was kind of tabula rasa for me when I was kind of trying to teach myself. And I was looking just at the world sort of anew and through, I was studying economics. I was becoming an economics major in my late 20s. And I noticed something. I debunked a belief that I had had, which is that the world was getting worse. This was really eye-opening for me. I felt like I was the only one in the world who discovered this, which of course is wrong. But when you're alone at your dining room table just studying, you think that every discovery is a new discovery. And I learned that the world isn't getting worse, that the world had gotten better since I saw the picture of that starving child, since I visited India and saw beggars and lepers on the street. The world had gotten better, had gotten a lot better, as a matter of fact. I learned that 80% of the world's worst starvation level poverty had been eradicated since I was a child. 80%. Now again, 66% of Americans think that the world's getting worse, and the truth is it's, by this measure, 80% better. What am I measuring, by the way, for those of you who are keeping track? I'm talking about people living on $1 a day or less, obviously adjusted for inflation. The percentage of the world living on $1 a day or less has declined by 80%. The World Bank does these calculations. They also look at higher levels. So if you look at $1.50 or $2 a day, it's down by 66% and it goes up. The story is consistent that the world is getting better, dramatically better. I mean, when it comes to dying of preventable diseases and dying of starvation. I didn't know that. Now, this is super exciting for me when I'm in my late 20s. I decided I want to dedicate my life to this. I want to tell everybody this. But the first thing I have to do is I have to find out why. What did it? Because if I can't find out what did it, I can't replicate it. What are we talking about? 80%, 20%, 66%? Forget it. Let me tell you about the lives. 2 billion people have been pulled out of starvation level poverty since I was a kid. 2 billion of my brothers and sisters are not poor, not dying, who would have been if it were the same economic conditions as 1970. I got to know the answer. So I went in search of the answer. This was my vision quest as a college student. Later, when I finished my bachelor's degree, I actually quit music and went to study this stuff so I could find the answer to this and I could talk about it. This was really, really what I wanted to dedicate my life to. And here's what I found. And again, I had no political background in this. I was not any kind of an activist. I was not voting for a particular party. I come from a background politically I come from a super progressive family in Seattle, Washington, just to give you an idea how I grew up, but I was not political in my own point of view. So I was open to different ideas. And I found the answer that what pulled 2 billion of my sisters and brothers out of poverty since I was a kid. I found it was really 5 forces that did that. It was the globalization of ideas. And globalization gets such a bad rap these days. The globalization of ideas where the best ideas spread around the world. It was free trade, largely after 1980. Free trade where poor countries were able to specialize and sell their goods and services to richer countries and became markets as well. It was the spread of the rule of law and property rights to countries that had never had it. This was at a time when I saw a picture of a kid starving in Africa, he saw a picture of you. And people all over the world said, I want that freedom, and I want that stuff. And they grabbed it. And that meant that they were going to throw off the chains of their poverty and tyranny as a result as well. And they said, I want property rights and the rule of law, which we take for granted in countries like this, and so in other countries around the world. But people can't in other places. So it's those 4 forces and one other, which is the culture of entrepreneurship, the idea of saying it's a good thing to try something new. It's a good thing to strike out on your own. It's an adventure, that your life is an enterprise, and use it as such. This was a gift that actually came largely from this society to the rest of the world. And those 5 forces together were largely responsible for the declines in starvation level poverty around the world. Now, I wasn't kidding myself. That's not the only thing that matters. And it's not like it doesn't come with costs. We know in point of fact that the free enterprise system can come with costs. And you need other stuff. You need regulation, and you need government, and you need lots of systems and structures that can put boundaries and rules around this. And sometimes it doesn't work very well. But on balance, This is amazing. If you are your brother's keeper, which I want you to be with me, because we got one world, and there's still too many people in poverty, and I want to get the next 2 billion people out of poverty, and I know you do too, then you got to go with what works. Forget your politics, forget your ideology. Please join me and be a warrior for these ideas, because we need you, and they need you, quite frankly. That's the second part of the claim. Capitalism is good for the rich and bad for the poor. Claim number 2, bad for the poor. Busted. It's not. It's literally the best thing that's ever happened in global development. Not perfect, but the best single thing that's ever come down the pike. Okay, let's go to the first part of the claim. Capitalism is great for poor people. Now, I mean, great for rich people. Getting confused here. That's claim number 1. Capitalism is good for, let's just say, us. Okay? Is that true? I kind of took that one for granted too. I took that one for granted even after I was working in this realm of poverty alleviation. But then, you know, I would talk on a lot of college campuses about, 3 cheers for the way that we can design the free enterprise system and make it better and lift more people out of poverty and find ways to share it more. Let's do that, right? But then students would come up. This is starting about 5 years ago. Students would come up and they would say, yeah, I get it. I want to be a warrior. I want to be a warrior for this. I want to be a warrior for the poor. But what about me? I said, what are you talking about? Best thing that ever happened to you. He says, no. I don't want to be part of this materialism. I don't want to be part of greed. Look, I'm at this elite college, and I feel like it's all work, and get a job and earn, and where's my soul in all this? Where's the purpose in all this? Where's the meaning in all this? Sound familiar? Look, we all suffer from this, right? We're in a highly prosperous, work-oriented society. If it doesn't cross your mind that maybe these aren't the right goals, you're probably not paying close attention, and I bet you all are. I started hearing this again and again. I think it's kind of a rat race. I think this capitalism thing is kind of a rat race for me. And at first I was like, why, you little ingrate, right? But then I started hearing it from my own kids. And then I got to tell you, I read a study that really rocked my world. I try not to fall prey to confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is you think something and then you only find evidence that shows that you're right and you block out all the evidence to the contrary. Look, I'm a social scientist, so I work really hard to not fall prey to this. I really want the truth. And if I'm wrong, I want to know first, not last. So I'm always looking at studies, and I'm particularly interested in studies that appear to contradict my point of view. I want to see are the data good? And this falls into that category, right? So I'm this proponent of capitalism, like pom-poms, the whole deal. And I read this study from 3 psychologists at the University of Rochester. What they were doing is that they were giving a survey, and it was about 2009, to graduating seniors at the University of Rochester. Big group, is about 275. And they were asking them, this is an ingenious construction of the research. It was about happiness. It was a happiness study. It said, think of your life in 5 years. Think of yourself in 5 years. Imagine that you're happy. Okay, I'm not going to tell you what that means. You have to decide what that means. What are you doing? Now, if you think about it, it's brilliant, right? Because you don't have to tell people what happiness is. People define it for themselves, and they tell you what they're actually doing, which gives you a concept of what their best life is. It defines their happiness goals. Okay, they broke up almost into exactly to 50% groups. 50% had what the researchers called exogenous goals. What was exogenous goals? Money, ambition, success, fame, power, right? Professional success, as traditionally understood. The second 50%, which is mostly men and women, by the way. More men had exogenous goals. More women had endogenous goals. Now, you know, remember that word. I'm going to use endogenous goals a few more times here. But endogenous goals are about love and relationships. And so the first group would say, I want to be more successful than my peers. I want to make more money than my peers. I want to make management. I want to get a really great job. And the second group said, I want to have close friendships. I want to be close to my family. A lot of them said, I want to fall in love, I want to get married. And they had all this relationship, this love stuff, half and half. These were their goals, half and half. It was all spontaneous, right? Okay, here's where the research gets really interesting. They followed up They followed up mostly to find out if people actually hit their goals, if people were actually going to do what they were supposed to do to get happy as they saw happiness. They wanted to know if you said, to be happy, I have to do this, but then they go do that, right? Research finding number one, people did follow their goals and they hit their goals. Everybody hit their goals. This is news for you. You're going to hit your goals. But here's the bad news. If you have the wrong goals, you're going to have a worse life. Because that was finding number two that they weren't quite expecting. It turns out the ones who had exogenous goals, money, power, and fame, unhappiness, depression, anxiety, anger, high level, even physical maladies like stomach aches and headaches. The ones who had endogenous goals about love and relationships, they were happier. They were less depressed. They were less anxious. They had better physical health. So finding number one, you're going to hit your goals. Congratulations. Number two, you better have the right goals. Actually, there's number three. I don't know how to talk about capitalism anymore. I don't know. Look, I know how to talk about it for poor people. I just don't know how to talk about it for you. I don't know if it's the best system for you. I don't know if I can stand up here in good conscience and say the capitalist system is what you need so that you can live good lives. And I'm in the business of love and happiness. That's literally my research beat. So what do? How do I talk about it? I was kind of in a tailspin over this, as a matter of fact. I stopped talking about the whole capitalism thing. I got to work this out. Philosophically, I was looking at as much data as I could possibly find. Now, at the time, I was traveling a lot to India. I've done a lot of research in India on various topics. Any of you who've read my books, you know that there's always a lot of India in my books. It's the most interesting place if you're interested in capitalism, because every time you go, it's better. It's a better country every time you go. It's phenomenal. It's interesting. The people are great. I love it there. And I was on my way to India with a scholar from my institution, the American Enterprise Institute, who is our India scholar. He goes with me a lot. His name is Sadanand Dubey. And I said, I have this thing on my mind. And I was describing it to him. He's my colleague. I said, I don't know how to talk about capitalism. I feel like I kind of hit a brick wall. I think it might make us less happy. And I don't know what to do, because I'm not going to be part of something that makes us less happy. I don't know how to sort this out. He said, I got the perfect guy for you to talk to. I said, you got a guy? He said, yeah, I got a guy. He can sort this out. I said, what's his name? He says, when we get to India, you'll meet him. I said, what's his name? He said, his name is Swami Gyanmuni. I said, you're putting me on, right? I mean, I have questions about capitalism, and you're going to send me to your Swami, a guy named Swami, or whose title. He said, yeah, trust me, he's the best. All right. So we get to Delhi, and this first or second day, we go out to this temple. It's a very famous temple on the outskirts of Delhi. It's enormous, called the Akshardham Temple. It was founded, it was a sect of very strict Hinduism that was founded by a man named Swami Narayan in the 17th century. And in this particular temple, it's so beautiful. It was cut out of pure limestone by 10,000 stone cutting artisans working full time for 7 years. It's a wonder of the modern world. And so I went there to meet this Swami to ask him about capitalism. It's like this crazy thing that I'm doing, right? But I'm desperate at this point. So I get there, and it's a hot day in May. It's the hottest month in Delhi. I'm standing out in this courtyard waiting for Swami. And I'm rehearsing in my mind how I'm going to explain my problem. And I see him coming toward me, and he's like orange robes and a shaved head, and he's looking like a Swami. And he sees me, because I kind of stand out. And he gets about, and I'm thinking, am I going to be able to have the nuance in this explanation? This is pretty philosophically, heavy stuff. And so I'm practicing what I'm going to say, right? And he gets about three, and I'm saying, will he have the familiarity with the vernacular here? I mean, I know his English is going to be fine, but still, he gets like 3 meters from me, right? And he looks at me and he goes, how you doing? I'm like, where are you from? And he says, Texas. So this is getting really weird, right? So I've come to India to talk to a Swami about capitalism from Texas. And so I say, first thing I said, you got to tell me your story. This has got to be good. And so he tells me this story. And I'm going to share it with you because it's germane to this adventure that I'm telling you about. Swami Gyanmuni was born in Houston. His parents were immigrant petroleum engineers who had come to the United States to give a better life to their children, particularly during the period of the worst vestiges of Indira Gandhi's socialism. So they went there just to have a better life. And they raised their kids in Houston, and they had these extremely demanding exogenous goals for their kids. They're like, we give up everything. You're going to work and you're earn and you're going to be successful. And he totally delivered. He said he graduated from high school when he was 16 years old, valedictorian. He got a full scholarship at the University of Texas. Went there as an engineer, graduated in 3 years, and then went to get his MBA, which he finished in quick succession, and then took a job at McKinsey. I mean, this is like every dad's dream, right? And he said that it was unbelievable. I mean, he was on the fast track. He was working 100 hours a week. He said there were a lot of sacrifices. He didn't have time for a girlfriend. He barely had time to hang out with friends and family. But boy, was he making a lot of money. He said his second year, he was making more money than his dad. And he said his dad was very proud. But you know, these sacrifices, they kind of add up, right? He said on his 26th birthday, he'd been at this for about 5 years, he woke up on his birthday and he said, is this it? Work, 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 earn, earn, earn. Is this it for the rest of my life? What about my purpose? Sound familiar? This is the exogenous goals. They lead to these problems, don't they? He had hugely exogenous goals, and he got to this place where he was totally unsatisfied with his life. This is what I'm worried about for you. This is what sent me into this research in the first place. So Swami Gyan Muni, he was a very observant, very religious Hindu. And he decided that he was going to dedicate the next 6 months of his life to discernment, to discern his purpose. He was going to pray every day to discern his purpose. And he did. And at the end of 6 months, he came to an answer. He sold everything he had, he quit his job, and he moved to India, joined a seminary, and 6 months later, he came out a penniless, renunciant Hindu monk. And that's where I met him. So now I know this is a setup. Like my friend from AEI, he's setting me up. Because I'm talking to this guy who, I mean, look, this guy had said goodbye to capitalism, and I'm there to ask him if capitalism's good. I feel like I'm getting punked here, but I ask him anyway. And I know what I'm going to say, Swami, is capitalism good? He's going to say, no, it's a man-made prison. Do what I did, quit, right? I know what's going to happen, right? But I ask, Swami, is capitalism good? And he says, no, it's great. It's the best thing that's ever happened to this country. The people of my country are not starving today because of capitalism. People in your country, they trash it all the time. They don't understand. People are not dying because of capitalism, full stop. Better than I could have said it. And I said, but look at you. You gave it all up because it was a man-made prison, right? He said, isn't money bad? I said, this whole time, by the way, he's calling me dude. He says, dude, you're not getting it. The problem isn't money. The problem is attachment to money. There's a word in Sanskrit, upadana. Upadana, it's a complicated word. It's a complicated concept in one word. And it means the sticky cravings for unsatisfying things. Isn't that a beautiful word, right? Upadana, right? And he said it's upadana. That's the problem with attachment to money. It's an upadana. That's what he said. And it reminded me, by the way, of an idea that I have always known but have forgotten, which is the most frequently misquoted scripture in the Christian Bible, which is the first letter of St. Paul to Timothy, 6th chapter, the 10th verse. Here's how it's misquoted. Money is the root of all evil. You've heard it, right? That's wrong. Those of you who've seen my movie know, because I talk about it in the movie. The real scripture is that the love of money is the root of all evil. That's the same thing that Swami was talking about. Upadana is about the love of money, is the attachment to the physical stuff. You need to be free of that. You don't need to be free of money. You need to be free of attachment to money. He said, and he went on, I said, I think I'm getting it. He says, look, if you want a Mercedes, buy a Mercedes. But don't fall in love with your Mercedes, because then you become a prisoner of it. He said, it is dangerous to be rich, but it's dangerous because we fall in love. We become idolatrous with the object of these riches. I was thinking about that, and boy, it sure rings true, doesn't it? Why is it that we forget that? Why do we forget, say, the letter to Timothy? Why do we forget that it's attachment? Why do we forget that attachment brings misery? And I think I know why. I think it's a conspiracy. I think there's a conspiracy. If you watch TV or watch the movies, you hear one strong, salient narrative coming through all the time. You know what it is? Love things, use people. That's what it says, right? People are there for your consumption, for your satisfaction, for your ambition. And what do you love? You love my product. You love your money. You love all the stuff that you can buy. And people are nothing more than a tool at your disposal. You know in your heart that's exactly wrong. You need to transpose the verbs and the nouns. Thus, the formula to a happy life is use things, love people, full stop, that's it. Use all the things that you want, never love them. Love the people, never use them. But we get it wrong. We get it upside down because of these commercial motives. And we become captive to those motives, don't we? So I came back to the United States, just loaded for bear. Because I'd figured it out. I said, the problem, and I remember the first time I was on a college campus after I did a whole soliloquy about the beauties of capitalism for pulling people out of poverty. And I said, and I know it's dangerous for you. It's dangerous for you. Why? Not because of capitalism, but because of attachment to material things. Don't do that. And a kid goes, how? And I said, I don't know. Back to the drawing board. That's when the real research began. And I want to give you, and I've written a lot about this. I can tell you as much about this as you want, but what I really want to do is I want to give you something that you can gnaw on tonight. I want to give you what I think are the two best strategies for not falling prey to attachment to material things. The two things that you can do to live a happier life starting today without trying to trash and throw out the whole system that's pulling so many people out of misery around the world. Because you know what? You are responsible for making sure that a system exists for other people, but you can still do that without becoming crazy and miserable in your own right. Two things. Lesson number one, because again, what is this? The speech is called Abundance Without Attachment. Lesson number one for abundance without attachment. I want you to get into your head a vision, a picture of the thing to which you're most attached. Okay? Something that you all have it. Something that you're really attached to. Something in the material world. Okay, you got it in your head? Give it away. See, charity, giving, is the act of rebellion against attachment. It's you declaring your independence from the tyranny of attachment. That's why giving is so radical and so radically transforming for people's souls. I found this out through my own research. When I was still a professor at Syracuse, my main area of research was the economics of philanthropy. I did a lot of work. A lot of it was really kind of conventional stuff. You know, GDP goes up by a certain amount. How much does charity go up? That kind of stuff. Tax rates. I'm an economist after all. But I found this weird thing over the course of my research that I could never explain. I found that when people gave more money away, they got richer. Now, and by the way, I found evidence that it was causal based on the way that I was running my statistical models. I found evidence of causality. The more you give, the more money you earn. This is crazy. This doesn't make sense. You know, there's no economist out there who says, you want to get rich? Give all your money away. That's not an investment strategy that anybody would recommend. It's a good thing. It might get you into heaven, but that's not how you retire in a secure state. Okay. So, but I kept finding it over and over again. I found it, you know, for the whole country. As the country became more philanthropic, I found evidence that there was at least compelling to me causal inference that it would lead to higher levels of GDP that were at least attributable in part to this level of philanthropy, and certainly the level of the individual. So I was at an impasse in my research. You know, my theory said that shouldn't be true, and my data kept saying it is true. You know, what do you do? So I did what social scientists always do. I threw away my data. You know, I clung to my theory, looking for new data that are going to support my theory. Couldn't find it. It was really on my mind. And I was having a lunch with a friend who was a psychologist who did work in the area of charitable giving. And I said, I have a problem with my data. It's what academics are always talking about. I was talking to Danny Blanchflower today about data, right? Data. We love data. And he said, what's the problem with your data? This psychologist did. And I said, I keep finding that the more money you give to charity, the richer you get. What am I doing wrong with, and I told him about my data. And I said, what do you think I'm doing wrong? And he said, what are you talking about? We've known that for 30 years. He says, but we don't talk about that boring question about making more money when you give more money away. We talk about the interesting question, which is why, which is that when you give more money away, you become more effective and happier as a person. So no kidding, of course you make more money. But what's really interesting is the extent to which when you volunteer and you give, you become a happier person. That's the most interesting research finding. And the light bulb went off. Ding. It turns out, of course, give more, get richer, get happier. I have data that show that the more you give to charity, the better looking you get. I promise, it's true. There's this study for these guys at the University of Liverpool where they'll bring couples into the laboratory, and some have just gotten together, and some have been married for 50 years. And the way that the thing works is that there's a guy in the one building, and he'll say to the man, he'll say, you're going to walk down there with her, down this path to another building and have a researcher that's going to interview you for a few minutes. And he gives him a pocket full of change, coins. And he says, you get to keep the money. Simple. And he says, fine. So they go walking 2 by 2 by 2. And it turns out between the buildings on the path, there's a little alleyway. And a homeless man comes wandering out of the alleyway, and he panhandles the husband. Now you know what's going on. He's a confederate of the researchers. The homeless guy is actually part of the experiment. And so the husband or boyfriend has to make a choice. Am I going to give up money to the homeless guy or not, and how much? Okay. They get to the next building, and the other guy in the white lab coat's waiting for him. And he says to the husband, how much money did you give the homeless man? And then when he finds out, he writes it down. He turns to the wife and says, how attractive do you find him right now? They're forming a correlation between your generosity and how much she likes you. It turns out the more you give, the more handsome you get. News you can use. This is a very practical seminar here today. So this is the lesson. This is the core lesson. Are you ready to rebel? Are you ready to rebel against the materialism that will hold you hostage? Then think about the thing to which you're most attached. Give it away. You will change your life. Lesson number 2, for abundance without attachment. Invest in endogenous things. Exogenous, money, power, fame. Endogenous, exogenous, money, power, fame. Endogenous, love and relationships. Take your material wealth. Don't invest in the material things. Invest in love and relationships. How? I have a colleague at the Harvard Business School. His name is Mike Norton. He does a lot of work on this. But you've experienced this in your life as well. I've been married for 28 years. Happily married for 28 years. And I'm going to tell you the secret to my happy marriage. Okay? Those of you who are not married, you might take note. Those of you who are married and unhappily married, you might want to take note. So my wife Esther and I, 27 years ago, we were just about ready to celebrate our first wedding anniversary. Okay? And we were having this big fight, this big argument, ironically, about how to celebrate our first wedding anniversary. And we were poor. I mean, we were living in South Florida. We had just immigrated to the United States from Spain. She was working a minimum wage job. I was, studying by correspondence school, the stuff I talked to you about before. Man, we had just like nothing in the checking account. We figured we could borrow or steal or something, just enough money for one of two things. One of two things, not both. Enough that we could go to the beach for the weekend, or we could buy a couch. And we didn't have a couch. So we had to figure out which one of these things to choose to celebrate our first wedding anniversary, right? And okay, now I'm a very practical person. I wanted the couch. My wife, she's from Barcelona, she's all about the beach. So we were having a big argument, beach, couch, beach, couch. Finally, we compromised and went to the beach. And that's why I've been married 28 years. That's not my point. So here's the weird thing. 5 years ago or so, we were remembering that. And we did get a couch. That was like 3 couches ago. I don't remember with that first couch. I don't remember anything about that couch. Just, I don't know, take a nap on it, or was it blue? I don't know. But I remember everything about that weekend. I can tell you, it's because we were in love, and we still are. My heart was in that weekend. My heart wasn't in that couch. Here's the point. We have a tendency to think that exogenous things are permanent and that endogenous experiences are evanescent. That is exactly the opposite of the truth. The truth is that the experiences with people you love are permanent. That's the way you get permanent things. All the other stuff is just here today, gone tomorrow. There's the most effective credit card commercial in the history of that industry is this MasterCard commercial. You've all seen it. They've redone it every couple of years for decades. It's been on the air for 40 years. And it has the same formula again and again and again. It'll be a guy and a kid, and they're getting into a car. And it starts going through a list. It'll say, beach ball, $3. Gas for the car, $36. 2 nights at the hotel, $250. The weekend alone at the beach with my son, priceless. It's just an ad, guys. But there's something about it. The reason it's effective is because it speaks a truth to your heart that is the truth about endogenous experiences and their permanence. And you crave them, right? Look, we don't care about the 2 nights at the hotel. We don't care about the beach ball. We don't care about the gas. We care about the relationship with the people that we love. I have 10 studies that show this. They're boring. The only one that really matters is the experience that each of us has in our own life. I have 3 kids. Esther and I have 3 kids. They're 21, 19, and 16. And our 19-year-old is just about to turn 20. He's a farmer. And he didn't go to college. He's a farmer in Alabama. Very proud of it because he's living his best life and doing it in his own way. And when Carlos, his name is Carlos, when he was 9 years old, he came to me and he said, "Dad, I've been thinking about Christmas." And I'm like, I'm on guard at this point, right? Because there's nothing good that can come from this, I figure. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I don't want anything this year. I just want to go fishing alone with you." Like in Florida, right? And I'm thinking, this is going to cost me 19 times as much as a bike, Father of the Year, right? And so I'm like, "Yeah, let's do that, Carlos." And we did it, and we've done it every year since he was 9. Like, I'm not a hunting fishing guy. I don't know how this is, like the gun. I don't know how does the gun work. I don't know, you put the worm on I don't know. I mean, I grew up in Seattle. We don't do that, right? But I'll do anything to spend time with Carlos. I love spending time with Carlos. And I can tell you every place we've gone and everything we've shot and caught since he was 9 years old. It's amazing. It's changed my life. And Carlos says, "Dad, when you're older, I'm going to take you." And I know he is. My friends, this kills tyranny. If you're held hostage by your attachment to these exogenous things, declare your independence with love. You don't have to give up on capitalism. You can't give up on capitalism because there are people around the world who need it. They need you. But you deserve in your own life to be happy. And this is the way to do it. So here's my offer to you, my friends. You often hear something that's completely wrong, that capitalism is good for rich people and bad for poor people. I hope I've convinced you to your satisfaction that that's wrong, that it's bad for poor people, and I hope I've convinced you to your satisfaction it's dangerous for you, but there is something that you can do about it, and in so doing, you will make your life better and you will make the world better because there will be more love in this world. And that's ultimately what we all want. So this is a new day for this debate, isn't it? Forget the Democrats and Republicans. Forget the conservatives and the liberals. Let's talk about us as brothers and sisters. Let's talk about capitalism the way we really need to talk about it, as a device to lift people up and as something that can't hurt us because we care about what matters most. If we do this, it's a new day in this debate. And if we take every other point of the debates of the day in this fashion, which is to say, to serve others and to bring more love, it's a new day in politics. And maybe it starts right here at Dartmouth College. If so, my only words to you are, God bless you, and thank you.
Time for questions. We have 2 roving mics. Just raise your hand and the mic.
You got roving mics. We'll right here. We're coming to you right here. Yes, sir.
Hello. I'm a freshman at the college, and I just wanted to know, in your analysis of the benefits of the capitalist system, if you consider the environmental problems associated with it, in particular, how fossil fuels, an essential component of the modern system, are affecting the environment. I mean, just something to consider. Like, at the same time that China's economy grew and massive numbers of people would pull out of poverty, the health problems, such as associated with air pollution and water pollution, skyrocketed.
Right.
So also, the free market in India and China, the economy growth has decreased to a significant percentage.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I said, thank you for that. So one of the things that I said is that it's naive of us to say that just because it has these incredible benefits to pull people out of poverty, which, by the way, for me, outweigh everything else, it is naive to say that there's nothing bad. There's nothing bad going on. But we can walk and chew gum, my friends. The idea that we can't solve this problem and the only solution is to get rid of capitalism, what that'll do is it will consign millions of people to starvation and death. We have a responsibility to try to solve both of these problems at the same time, and I'm convinced that we can. Now, to begin with, there's no evidence that capitalism per se is behind the environmental problems. You know, the worst environmental problems that I've literally ever seen are in the Soviet Union. I mean, the most horrific environmental problems were in the Soviet Union during their process of development, in their industrial development. So this is kind of a human problem and a values problem. We need to take this on its face. Now, it's really hard to go to China and India and say, we developed this way and we're living a pretty good life. You don't get to develop this way anymore. However, we do have a responsibility to try to find technological solutions that can change their growth path such that they can have the development without the starvation and at the same time actually develop with sufficient energy and sufficient energy supplies. That should be actually our goal. And if we can't dedicate ourselves to that and we're still dithering over whether capitalism is good per se, what we're really saying is, what's more important, the environment or the lives of billions of our brothers and sisters in need? And I don't want to have that argument. I don't think we need to have it, and I don't want to be part of it. Thank you for that. That's a wonderful question. Thanks. We got another one right over on...
Hi, my name is Molana. I'm an intern at FAIR. So in regards to your first solution, which is charity, how do you formulate that, like as a government? If I'm a government officer and I'm thinking, what should I do? Like, what is an example? Thank you.
So a lot of people will think of charitable giving as kind of equivalent to, or at least a substitute with what the government does in terms of the provision of goods and services. And just in terms of how you get stuff provided, that can be true. But that's not what I'm talking about. There's no evidence that taxation and redistribution has any material benefits on happiness or welfare of individuals. It's important to do because you got to provide services. But we should think of these things as distinct phenomena. When I'm talking about charity, it's weird because the whole point that I was making is not about how charity is good for the beneficiaries of charity. My point is it's good for the givers. It's actually better for the givers, maybe. I'm also happy that it's good for the beneficiaries if we do it right, and it should be actually complementary to what we do with the distribution of goods and services through public sector means.
I have a question specifically about taxation. I feel like in other countries other than the US, there is a positive attribute associated with taxation that I would imagine follows suit in the same way that charity giving in the US does. And I think that there's like probably a difference existent in the US and the rest of the world. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
It's funny. So philanthropy and charity, there's a lot of comparative international studies that show how people see charity and philanthropy in different places around the world, and it's seen very differently in different places. And it's also true that taxation is seen very differently in different places. And part of it is different national histories and different national traditions of both tax paying and the role of government and charity. So the United States is kind of unique insofar as we're by far the most charitable culture in the world. I mean, there are a couple of countries. Some people will say that in certain ways Israel is a really charitable country as well, but it's a small country and hard to compare. There's no major industrialized country on the scale of the United States that comes even close to how much Americans give and volunteer per capita. There's actually one country, big country, that volunteers as much or more than the United States, and that's the Philippines, of all places. So, and part of that is just because there's this big charitable, there's a tradition in America of people giving charitably. There's a more troubled relationship with government going back a long time. However, there's a very interesting point to make that there's two other kinds of regimes out there. We often think of the Nordic regimes. That's probably what you have in your head, is like Denmark and Sweden and Iceland and places where people are pretty untroubled by paying extremely high tax rates.
I mean, like even in South America.
Well, in South America, they have huge rates of tax evasion and tax avoidance. Huge rates. And so you go to a place like Venezuela or Colombia or Argentina. If you talk to people in Argentina, if you're paying your taxes, you're cheating your family. There's a culture of tax evasion in a place like Argentina. There's a culture of cheating the government, which is here's the interesting thing. People evade their taxes in America, but nobody wants their friends to know they're evading their taxes. That's a really good thing, as far as I'm concerned. It's amazing, it's like if I'm not paying my taxes, I'm committing fraud. I'm not going to brag about it to my friends because I don't want my friends to think I'm a cheater. That's good. It'd be better if nobody evaded their taxes in the first place. So South America is kind of mixed in this funny way. There are places like Russia where you're absolutely considered to be an idiot for actually paying your taxes because everybody knows that the government is going to misappropriate the funds and do things that you don't like with it. So around the world, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find a good relationship and a lot of trust. One of the really troubling things in the United States right now is that trust is falling so fast for institutions in the public sector. There's literally, since 1975, only one government institution where trust has been rising consistently. Anybody know what it is? It's the military. Military is the only one. Every other part of government, House, Senate, permanent bureaucracy, agencies, has been going down and down and down. We have to turn that around. We've got to change that because what we're going to get in one generation or two is you're going to be saddled with an economy where people are very comfortable evading their taxes because that's kind of the next step. And that's a really big problem. Now, there's a couple of studies that show in the Nordic countries that people do get enough satisfaction from their charitable giving that it can be comparable, to their tax paying, that it can be comparable to charitable giving. But we're not there yet in the United States and in most of the world. That's a whole book that you asked me about. That'd be a great senior thesis. You should write that senior thesis. It'd be phenomenal. I would love to be on the outside committee.
Hi, so I was just wondering.
I don't know if it's on, but I can hear you.
Okay. So you have talked a lot about how you don't really, or you said earlier when you were in the government class today, you don't really care what happens to the people that are well off, that have money. You really care about helping those that are the poorest. And so in the movie that we saw how good capitalism was for India and how it really brought up a significant number, not in India but in the world, 2 billion people out of the worst kind of poverty. So why do you think the rhetoric, especially in the United States, about capitalism is not about the good it does, but about the bad and how it really is disadvantageous for the poorest people, when it's very possible to show that it actually helps the poorest people the most? Why is that the discussion? Why are people not championing capitalism, the same people that are championing rights for the poorest people?
Yep, right, exactly right. I have cracked my head over that for a long time, and I think I know the answer to it. It's sort of a slight multi-part answer to it. But to begin with, people who are champions of capitalism are incompetent at communicating the most important thing. It's the weirdest thing. It's as if you had this beautiful, this treasure, and you couldn't talk about the most important thing about it. You were talking about the least important thing. I talk to people who are really proponents of capitalism, and they talk about this kind of weird, desiccated rhetoric of the culture of freedom. I'm free to do what I want, and I can become a billionaire if I set my mind to it. Like, okay, but that's point number one. Point number two is that most people actually don't know these truths about capitalism because they're really far away. You know, what's going on in India and Africa is so far away from what's happening in the United States. And what's happening in the United States is that we see, particularly in the wake of a financial crisis, we see, as is always the case after a financial crisis, that until about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago or so, all of the benefits of economic growth went to the top 20% of the income distribution. It's always happened after a financial crisis. I wish I could solve it. I don't know any economists who know how to solve this. But the result of that is inevitably after a financial crisis, you get a lot of populist rhetoric on both the right and the left who say, the rich people have got your stuff and I'm going to get it back. They're using capitalism. Capitalism is bad. So you get this double whammy of not actually seeing or understanding the benefit of our brothers and sisters in other places and seeing a lot of sort of blooming inequality that's happening, particularly for the bottom 3 quintiles of the income distribution in the United States today. What do I need? I need people who are basically, not to put too fine a point on it, warriors for the poor on the progressive left who are willing to fight for capitalism around the world and globalization and free trade and an open society. That's what we actually need, because that's the best thing that can actually happen to people around the world. While at the same time trying to redress stuff like climate issues, which we absolutely can. Thank you for that. Let's see, you're deciding. I don't have the mic, so you go ahead. Yeah.
My question was, so how does the history of Jim Crow and slavery affect how we view, I can take this, affect how we view capitalism in an American context? Because to me, it seems like the reason why people are venturing towards socialism is because people have had a 250 plus year head start in America.
Yeah. So the truth is that obviously opportunity has not been equally shared in this country. And it's interesting, I talk an awful lot about how competition works, competition in labor markets, competition in regular markets. And the biggest problem that we have is not that competition is bad, it's that people try to shut down competition. People shut it down all the time. You know, we talk about crony capitalism, people that have special deals wired into the government. That's not capitalism. That's a completely different thing. It's a totally wired system. And you know, in labor markets and in social situations where we discriminate against certain people because of religion or race or gender, that's shutting down competition. The problem that we've had all these years is we have not offered equal opportunity to people. And so the key idea is, what can we do more as aggressively and as creatively as possible to push as much opportunity to everybody in America, to basically say, look, we have denied the sense of equal dignity, radically equal dignity to people. Competition is supposed to let people actually work together cooperatively within a set of rules and actually earn according to their merits. You won't let them because of discrimination. No matter how hard they work, you don't let them. That's the essence of racism, isn't it? That's what we want to be. I think that in going forward, the best tool that we have for equal opportunity and anti-racism is actually more and more creative approaches to pushing the benefits of the free enterprise system and opportunity to every corner of our society today. And that's what I need the best thinking from the new generation on. It's a great question. I appreciate that a lot. John, I'm in your hands. Yeah, yes, sir.
Thank you. I'd be interested in your ideas on reconciling the myth of perpetual economic growth on a finite planet.
So the myth of economic growth and?
The myth of perpetual economic growth on this finite planet.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in light of major ecosystems being in collapse, the start of the next great extinction.
So one of the problems that we've had a tendency to, it's almost an inevitable problem when you're in systems that are poorly understood, is that you have non-sustainable resources that were acting as if they were infinite. I mean, it's just almost every economic system has done that. And what you find is that you can, in not only economic systems, but in biological systems as well, when they get into an equilibrium, you find the rate of growth that's compatible with sustainability. And that's that requires the technique to actually find the sustainable resources and the rate of growth that's compatible with that. And that's what we're struggling to find in this country. In this world, in point of fact, you can have perpetual growth that's above zero, but we don't know what it is, and we don't actually have the technology yet. We're not actually demonstrating that we're even looking for the technology yet that will make sure that we're doing it in a sustainable way. You don't run out of everything all the time because we don't have a zero-sum world. But to have a positive sum world, you have to have a sense of sustainability, and that actually requires mastery and the social consciousness to want to seek it in the first place. And the truth is we're not there yet, and we should dedicate ourselves to finding it.
Certainly, I agree with that. But just it looks as though the oceans are in trouble. We need the resources of the oceans. We need the resources of the earth. It seems as though there's very little talk about what many people would say an overpopulation problem. If we expect everyone on the planet to elevate to some standard of living. Some studies would say that we may have 2 to 3 times more people on the planet to sustain a culture at a European standard of living.
So there's a lot of there's still a lot of talk about the sustainability of population, and I reject those studies completely. I think that we have not even come close to finding the number of people in the world that we can support. With our resources and with our food supplies, we have a massive problem in food distribution. We have a massive problem in understanding how to get people what they want, but we can solve that problem. We find that countries that are in a process of underdevelopment today and backwards development today, they tend to have 0 or negative population growth. So people ultimately are the ultimate resource, but you have to be smart about how you actually sustain natural resources along with your human population. So look, this is a big debate that's still going on. I just happen to be on one side of the debate. And I think that we can have growing populations, we can have sustainability, we can have capitalism that's actually more conscious of these particular needs. And I think actually we will get there. I'm an optimist. I think we're going to get there.
Can we do it with so much human and natural resources being used on fluff commodities that have no real purpose?
Yeah, can we actually?
I argue all the time that I say all the time that there was a time when developments came about for products and entrepreneurship to raise some level of societal need, not in that the product had an intrinsic value of its own, not a friggin' pet rock.
Yeah.
Well, we're
pet
wasting
rocks are actually
human
sustainable, but
we're wasting human and natural resources on a lot of commodities which have no purpose other than making money.
Yeah, well, people actually gain utility from what they say in the consumer society, and the big point of my talk today was not to do that. The big point of my talk today was actually how we can have a cultural revolution against that. And that's actually what you ultimately need. You don't get that through rationing, you don't get that through command and control, you don't get that through government action. You get that because people change their values, and that's what we need. All right. Yes, sir.
So early in your lecture, in the class, you kind of joke about how your family, your dad is a professor, and like how you grew up, you kind of have a negative view of capitalism. There's something that I wonder in America is like why so many, like let's say college professor or intellectuals in the social science department are so against capitalism.
Yeah, that's gonna be a fun one. I mean, there's been a lot written about that, about how attitudes tend to vary with respect to different professions. And what you typically find in academia is what I love about academia is that people experiment with unusual ideologies in academia because you can. And a lot of progress happens because when people think differently, and you need an ecosystem where people can think differently. The result is that academia draws in people that think in a bohemian kind of way. And that means a little bit different than the typical way that people who go into standard professions are going to think. So one of the things I love about academia, one of the things I value, I'm a 3rd generation academic, and my oldest son wants to be a 4th generation academic. It's fun to be around people who think weird things. It just is. I mean, it's more fun than people who think non-weird things, to be quite honest about it. And one of those tends to coalesce. It hasn't always been the case, but certainly is right now. They tend to be on more sort of the progressive part of the political spectrum. For me, it's That's no price at all. I just want the most interesting people. And you know what? Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe they're right. That's okay too. I'm here to learn. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming to speak today. One of my questions is, a great product of capitalism is obviously technological development and advancements. And a common fear that we've started to hear about is that with these massive advancements in technology and artificial intelligence, jobs, especially low-skilled jobs, may start to be replaced in these first world, highly developed countries like the United States. Is this a danger of capitalism?
So we hear this a lot. I get this question a lot. You all get this question a lot too. It's that our economic system today is rewarding really fast innovation, technological innovation growth. And the result of that is that we're finding new ways to save on human capital, and that we're more interested in finding everything from more quicker machine learning than what people could put into production processes through AI, through driverless cars, and it's going to replace a lot of people. It's going to obviate a lot of people. Now, to begin with, getting rid of capitalism or turning back the tide through public policy is probably not going to work, because innovation always wins out in the end, one way or the other. If it doesn't happen here, it happens someplace else. And then through competition, we wind up having to adopt these technologies. But that said, I'm more sanguine than a lot of other people. I'm more optimistic. And the reason is because the people who are projecting massive job losses going forward, they're looking only at the way jobs look today. So it's all the jobs exactly in the job categories, and they say, okay, what could do that exact job category? But that's not the way jobs work. Every job is somewhere between 10 and 50 discrete tasks. Everybody's job is lots and lots and lots of stuff. And every couple of generations, the economy disaggregates everybody's tasks, puts them in a box, puts everybody's tasks in a box, and it reformulates jobs. Right now, that's a hard thing, right? People have to retrain for jobs that don't currently exist, but it's always happened. For the longest time, I mean, the Industrial Revolution was opposed by what we call Luddites. That was actually named after a guy named Ned Ludd. Ned Ludd had a merry band of guys with clubs that would go into factories and bust them up, right? Because what was effectively happening is that people's jobs were being disaggregated. It's not like nobody had jobs. They had different kinds of jobs. People don't actually like that. I think that going forward, certain jobs will actually disappear, certain tasks will disappear, but new jobs will reform. That's always been the case, and I'm actually seeing early indication that's the case, that jobs are coming up in different places. We need to find better ways to retrain people. That's going to be the challenge, as opposed to finding bread and circuses to occupy them. Thank you. That's a good question.
We have time for two more questions.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming to
Thanks.
class and for the documentary. In class today, you mentioned briefly deaths of despair, but then we did not have time to drill down on that. And it's an important phenomenon, doesn't get that much attention, and it's appearing at a time of bounteous production. So
Right.
could you talk more about what you think is going on there and what might be a productive path forward?
Yeah. So deaths of despair is a term of art coined by Professor Angus Deaton and his wife, Professor Ann Case at Princeton. They were doing work, they do demography, and they were doing work on looking at life expectancy, and they find that, as a general rule, it's an incredible story that people every generation are living longer with better lives and better health, and the world's getting better, et cetera, et cetera. And they found that since 1999 until 2015, that was the first time that one demographic turned around, which was white people 45 to 54 who are starting to die at earlier and earlier ages. So they drilled into it. What's going on? I mean, it's the first time they've ever seen something go backwards. They're just demographers. They're just kind of describing this. And they're finding this largely coming from three sources. There was a 49% increase in alcohol poisoning, a 76% increase in suicide, and a 323% increase in drug overdose deaths. I'm like, this is people that look like me and are my age. It's incredible when you think about it. Nobody's ever seen anything like this. And so they started asking, what's going on? This was in the early days, disproportionately being driven by men. Now it's pretty much neck and neck, men and women in this particular demographic cohort. And a large part of it has to do with the fact that we have big societal changes, particularly in rural America, where jobs have gone away, and there's a complicated story that comes into it. So the deindustrialization of rural areas in the United States some years ago actually led to a massive increase in permanent disability claims. For those of you who don't know, the federal government pays disability to people who can't work. So what happened is, as soon as there was deindustrialization in areas where basically no more jobs in particular areas, doctors moved in who specialized in making a prescription of disability claims. So, and they were doing it massively. It went from about 2 million people on permanent disability to about 12 million today. Okay, after this happened, there's an interesting phenomenon that pain doesn't predict disability. Disability and unemployment predict pain. The same doctors became pain doctors and started to prescribe OxyContin and Percocet and Percodan and all of the opiates that we hear about that are kind of we all know about at this point. They were unknown, except that the pain clinics were passing out pain pills to the people who were now idle and on disability, and it started a major drug crisis. By the time the crackdown came around, the pills actually had become illegal in most places and were on the black market. It got so expensive that there was a massive inrushing of heroin, largely across the Mexican border, that was much cheaper and in a way more effective because it was being cut by a Chinese opiate drug called fentanyl. Fentanyl is about 40 times more powerful than heroin. There's a variant called carfentanil produced in China that's 2,000 times as effective, as deadly as heroin. When it's being cut into heroin, users can't tell the difference, and this is what's actually, it's heroin cut with fentanyl that's creating overdose deaths. Okay, nobody is taking heroin for fun. I mean, it's like, look, even if it's fun, people are doing it because there's despair, because there's idleness, because there's an inability to actually find something, because we have a complete lack of imagination in this country about how we should have set up public policy. In the first place, we have public education systems that are totally unavailable to retrain people. We have no sense of how we should be able to move people from communities that lack opportunities to communities that have opportunity. And we have a welfare system that locks people into rural communities where they can't even move across state lines without losing their benefits. This is a perfect storm for people to be in these cases of despair. So this demographic phenomenon of simply people dying of these three things led to this. I mean, you start digging into it, it's like it gets worse, and the story gets worse, and the story gets worse and worse, and that's where we are today. So all this despair that you hear going on, that's the kind of the fast version of how that whole thing unfolded. You can see that it's a complicated thing to unravel. Thank you for that. You get the last question here. All right.
Hi. So
Hi.
I took the liberty to make some connections between what you talked about in class today and the documentary. And it seems to me that you would favor the idea that the government plays an essential positive role, or should play an essential positive role in providing people with a sense of dignity. And I was just wondering if that's true, and if that's true, what would be the reasons could you specify the reasons for holding that view?
Yeah, so despair is it's a perfect question. Despair is the opposite of dignity. Dignity is to be worthy of respect. A sense of your dignity is understanding that you are worthy of respect. Every single person in this room believes in the radical equality of human dignity. You've said you believe that everybody is intrinsically equal in how much they deserve respect. That's what you're saying, right? And I believe it, you believe it, we all believe it. The problem is we don't act like we believe it. The opposite of dignity is despair. So if you don't like deaths of despair, you need to work for dignity. How do you get it? As a psychological matter, the sense of your own dignity comes from one specific thing, which is feeling that you are needed, right? Nothing else will do it. If you feel that you're unneeded, you will lack a sense of dignity, and this leads to despair. This is the reason that unemployment was the beginning of this whole catalytic nightmare. This whole chain of events came from unemployment. Unemployment is to say, I don't need you. You're not needed, right? Okay, so what do we need to do? We need serious, not just policies, but we need an economy that makes people necessary. Now, my view of all this is, to begin with, in terms of public policy, If you want more dignity, you don't need a Department of Dignity. I don't recommend a Bureau of Public Dignity. I mean, that's probably not going to go well, right? Because you get somebody deciding what that is. Dignity comes from, I think the best thing the government can do is to get out of the way, and to a very large extent. How? We have a tendency to act as if poor people are not assets, that we don't need them. We treat poor people in this country like liabilities to manage. It's a huge moral error when you think about it. I mean, this is new. This wasn't the case several generations ago, where poor people worked and rich people worked. Now, I understand that we want more public assistance, but in setting up our public assistance programs where we make it impossible for poor people to work, we're saying, you're a liability to manage. Want to know why? Because we don't need you. That's saying you don't have equal dignity. That's a big problem. We need to redesign. It's going to be very expensive and very hard to do, but we know how to do it with our public policies regarding the poor. We need to set up systems where people are not actually fragmenting their families, because to be needed also means to be needed by your family, where we don't break up communities, except insofar as that people are moving for opportunity, so that new communities can actually form. You know, we need a case in where people need to be needed. And if we actually have a policy, have a set of policies, here's what I'm saying. Judge policies with this question: do they make people more needed or less needed? If they make people less needed, they're bad policies. If they make people more needed, maybe they're good policies. And that's not the standard by which we design nor judge our government policies today. Go ahead.
Very quickly, but such a genuine question. So in Soviet Union, for example, or communist China before, everybody had a job. Everybody was needed technically in the economy. What's your take on that?
Well, it's one of the great things is that everybody worked. Actually, that's one of the, I mean, not everything in the Soviet Union was terrible all the time. It's not a place where I wanted to live. And the way that they did that, actually, by the way, was by making unemployment illegal. Isn't that weird? So in the Soviet Union, it was illegal to be unemployed. And then, of course, the government became the employer of last resort, and the result of that was kind of predictable. You know, you'd have 6 guys standing around watching one guy dig a ditch over there, simply because that's the public policies. That was an uncreative way to do it. My guess is if you were the government were your employer of last resort and your job was to watch a guy digging a ditch, it wasn't going to help you very much in your sense of being needed. That said, it's probably still better than hanging around drinking vodka at home. So I think we can do better in both cases than that. And on that, my friends, I deeply appreciate this invitation to this great college, and I would love to be helpful to you going forward in any way. Good luck, and thank you.